Our fourth and final part of our basics of ecology is going to be looking at interactions within an ecosystem. Now, interactions are actually fueled by adaptations, or they're kind of regulated by adaptations, because organisms are going to have adaptations which are just beneficial, favorable characteristics that allow those organisms to survive within that particular environment. You can have predators that have adaptations, you can have prey to have adaptations, you can have both that have adaptations that give them that extra edge for survival. Examples: camouflage, mimicry, size of the organism, the structure of particular parts of that organism, whether it be beaks of birds or claws, those types of things. Hibernation is a big one as well. Just these little adaptations, these little extra boosts that give those organisms a little bit extra help for survival in that ecosystem. Now, as far as interactions go, a lot of interactions, or there's one major interaction that's fueled by competition. But there are many examples or many other branches off of that. Competition is a big thing. There's competition for a lot of things called limiting factors, and we'll get to limiting factors later on. But limiting factors limit the size of a population, and examples would be the amount of food, water, shelter, living space, the amount of mates available. Those are all examples of limiting factors and what competition is going to be over and about. So when you're looking at interactions, you're looking at these interactions based on fueling competition within a population. There are two versions of interactions. We're going to separate this first one from the rest of them, but as far as the predator-prey relationship, this is one of the largest interactions within an ecosystem, and it's the one that really drives and really helps control population size of different species, so that way not one species becomes dominant, which could have a detrimental effect on that particular ecosystem. So predation, one organism hunts and kills another. This is a very big and important relationship within an ecosystem. Now, as far as the rest of the relationships, all the other relationships are going to be considered symbiotic relationships, where you have symbiosis, or you have equilibrium being reached as a result of these relationships. These three, mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism, are going to fall in this category. As far as mutualism goes, you have a relationship between two organisms and both are benefiting. That is a mutualistic relationship. A common example, especially around in this area, you have cattle, and cattle during the spring and summer are bothered by pesky insects, biting insects, and so you might see from time to time little white birds called cattle egrets that hang out with the cattle or hang out with the cows. And what they're doing is they're eating the insects. The cows love that they're there because they're eating the insects that are biting them. So the birds get food, a food source, and the cows get a pesky nuisance removed from their habitat. Commensalism, another type of relationship. You've got one organism being benefited, the other one is not being benefited at all, but it's not being hurt either. So it really is kind of I don't care attitude from the other organism. An example of this one, you can look at on land. You can look at how trees and how birds build their nest in trees. Well, that tree could care less really if there are nests that are being built in its branches. It's not harming the tree's ability to function, to go through photosynthesis, that type of thing. But the birds get a big benefit from that because their homes are in a protected area off the ground, away from predators. If you switch to a different type of ecosystem and look at the ocean, you have large predators like sharks, for example, that are constantly on the move hunting for food. Well, when those sharks are going to be accompanied a lot of times by smaller fish, an example, remoras. Remoras are small little fish that have suction cups on their heads, and they can suction cup themselves to the shark and pretty much catch a free ride. They don't have to use any energy to swim. And then when the shark finds food, whatever's left over from that feeding, the remoras get to eat. The remoras are too small. They're not even going to really bother the shark whatsoever, but the remoras get a big benefit from that. And then parasitism, it is a symbiotic relationship, but what's happening in parasitism is the population of those species are definitely being regulated by this process. And obviously, in parasitism, one organism is going to harm another, usually by feeding off that other organism or by allowing that other organism to take care of daily functions for it. Usually, parasitism is rarely fatal, but it is one organism taking advantage of another and harming it in some way. For example, ticks and mosquitoes, those are parasitic relationships when ticks and mosquitoes interact with animals out in a habitat or in an environment. The animals aren't necessarily going to die, or the interaction is not going to be fatal. The ticks get food supply, the animals do get harmed, but they usually tend to live through it. Another example, it's another bird example, is there are types of birds called cowbirds, and what cowbirds do is they lay their eggs in the nests of other species of birds, and then when their babies hatch, the babies kind of force the other birds' eggs or other birds' babies out of the nest, and they're the only ones left. So what's happening is you have a totally different species of bird raising the babies of these cowbirds. Definitely a parasitic relationship, because the cowbirds are being benefited. They don't have to spend energy to raise their young. They're allowing a completely different species of bird to do that for them. This is an example of a symbiotic relationship between ants and aphids, and how aphids are insects, and what aphids do is they're kind of like little tube insects, and they'll drink the fluids out of the trees, usually the sap and nectar, but they can't process it all, and so a lot of it just passes straight through them, and the aphids turn into a straw of sorts that looks like it's been tapped into a tree, and you have this sweet tree nectar flowing out of it. Well, the ants can eat that nectar. It's not hurting the aphids, and the ants are being benefited, so you've got a commensalistic relationship occurring there. And then here is the information I just mentioned. It's a commensalistic relationship. Now, another example, I mentioned the remoras with the sharks. And then here's the result of that benefit as well. And then fleas with dogs, this is going to be your parasitic relationship, just another example. And that ends our 4 parts of our ecology basics.